Do you remember the beloved bastard on HBO's Game of Thrones? Of course you do. The once king of the North, Jon Snow, captures the hearts of millions as he fought for his people. We saw him as a boy and watched him as he became a man, making his family proud. You also remember feeling kind of underwhelmed by the finale of Game of Thrones? Well, you're not alone in that either, but now we have a whole new show to satisfy our craving for something better in the same universe we came to adore. House of the Dragon, the spin-off prequel to the show, will do just fine. In fact, it's been doing wonderfully. But we imagine it wouldn't be easy for the cast of the original show to watch. Stay tuned to find out what Kit Harington thinks about House of the Dragon. First up, HBO plans to keep the heat of Westeros alive. House of the Dragon has giant shoes to fill after the Game of Thrones final season left fans disappointed. The OG fans of the show were so disappointed with the Season 8 finale that they started a petition on Change.org to redo it. The petition has received over 1,855,000,000 or so signatures since it's a bunch of signatures. A remarkable number that is still rising today, and even urged HBO to respond. But basically, all they said was they're sorry they can't make everyone happy. In a sense, we get that it's kind of disrespectful to all those involved in the making of it. They surely didn't take it lightly. Our favorite Snow even gave an unfiltered piece of his mind when he said that the critics, in his head, can go bleep themselves. We get the sentiment. After working over a decade on something, it's hard to hear anything negative. Not so much to our surprise, even scorned audiences were intrigued by the prospect of returning to Westeros and, albeit begrudgingly, tuned into the record-breaking premiere. In an astounding turn of events, Episode 2 maintained the heat with even higher viewership numbers. The Dragonfield prequel has a winning start that surpasses the original Game of Thrones. But of course, this obviously has to do with the ready-made audience it had. HBO intends to keep the Game of Thrones brand hot with a number of spin-offs that are currently in development. If everything goes as planned, fans can expect to discover even more about House of the Dragon's Corlys Velaryon and the Sea Snake, which follows his excursions in forming one of Westeros' great naval forces. We'll also go on an epic adventure with Princess Nymeria, the fearless warrior after whom Arya named her direwolf. The most shocking addition is a sequel to the original show, which centered on the lone half-Targaryen wolf, Jon Snow. Given that Harington now has a stake in the spin-off, fans are eager to find out what he really thinks of the new prequel we are enjoying so much. So let's dive right in. It seems Kit was on the fence about it at first. The cast of our original favorite fantasy drama series was understandably nervous about how fans would react to The House of the Dragon before it aired. A spin-off is an extremely difficult feat to accomplish, and with a TV series as massive as Game of Thrones, the job can be even more challenging. The original cast members voiced fears and hopes ranging from production quality expectations to warm welcomes and guidance for the new cast. Kit Harington's take on the new show stood out from the crowd as he revealed in an interview that it might be painful to watch. His explanations include his strong attachment to the original show and how much he will miss being a part of Westeros. We totally get it. We'd be jealous watching someone else take our place in the world we made so popular too. He encourages them by saying that he'll still be watching the prequel and wishes them luck. And now that House of the Dragon is in full swing and 4 episodes in, Harington has some opinions on the massively popular series. So it turns out he likes it. Not too long ago, Kit Harington followed up on his previous comments in another interview after having actually watched the show. He talks about what he thinks about House of the Dragon. So he praised the series, saying he's really enjoying it. He also said he thinks they've done a fantastic job. And it's a weird thing to start a whole new show in the same kind of realm and to make it its own thing, but he thinks they've truly done that. He also mentioned his good friend Miguel Sapochnik as the showrunner for the series, which gives him more motivation to watch. It seems like Sapochnik will be leaving House of the Dragon as showrunner, but will continue to executive produce. Harington and he worked together extensively on set of Game of Thrones, since Sapochnik directed 6 episodes on the show, including Battle of the Bastards. That was a good one, the best. And after that, he was questioned about his growing Marvel role following 2021's Eternals. But with years of confidentiality training from his time on Game of Thrones, he managed to stay tight-lipped about any unofficial Black Knight news. Ah well, guess we'll just have to wait and find out for ourselves. Next, we'll be talking about what mistakes the new show shouldn't repeat. Some of the most dedicated fans of the show must be curious to know if the new series, set almost 200 years before the events of Game of Thrones, will repeat the original's now infamous mistakes. Despite the fact that the show's first 6 seasons were pretty much entirely praised by reviewers and adored by audiences, the slightly shorter final 2 seasons made so many blunders that the words Game of Thrones now tempt discussions about what a wasted opportunity it was, rather than being a major milestone for fantasy television. Here are some of the mistakes that House of the Dragon would do well to avoid. First, they got to cut out all the sexposition. Show, don't tell is a common writing tip for any medium. In summary, you want to try and prevent exposition dumps where characters explain their backgrounds and intentions out loud, because it slows down the storyline and feels fake. The writers of Game of Thrones, faced with a huge amount of info from the books that they needed to convey to viewers, weren't able to avoid many such scenes in which characters simply tell one another this sort of information. So what do? They split the difference and show a lot of nudity to spice things up. Critics thought up the term sexposition to describe this concept, pointing out that, in addition to failing to solve the show don't tell issue, the nudity was frequently gratuitous and offered no storytelling purpose for the characters involved. Ross, a sex worker, ended up appearing in 3 different variants of pretty much the same scene, being forced to listen to Tyrion Lannister, Theon Greyjoy, and Littlefinger ramble on and on about their family's history and aspirations while she was just trying to get through the day. Sexposition, rather than distracting viewers, was simply a way for the show to be lazy in 2 different ways at the same time. On the other hand, House of the Dragon has the chance to be more careful and fluid from the start. And while they're at it, turn down the sexual violence and assault. This has been mentioned many times, but Game of Thrones had a serious sexual violence problem. George R.R. Martin's novels and the show based on them are said to have attempted to depict a way of life similar to that of the world's Middle Ages, that were definitely cruel times to be alive. Even so, in recent years, there's been a genuine reckoning with the way we portray sexual assault in the treatment of women in writings and on screen. How much is needed to create the desired artistic effect, and how can you avoid unwittingly glorifying it? It's a fine balance, and House of the Dragon would be wise to avoid it as much as possible. Although it's true that the Targaryens had some particularly shocking traditions from a modern standpoint, it's easy to imply events and fixate on the psychological impact of such treatment in the service of character instead of gratuity. Also, let's tone down the needless gore. We're not trying to make it sound like a lecture, but a dash of off-screen violence can go a long way. Remember how the cop in Reservoir Dogs had his ear sliced off? We all do because it was terrifying. It had an impact, yet none of it was shown on the screen. Of course, nobody here expects a Game of Thrones spin-off to be concerned with the complexities of successful diplomacy, but there's a fine line between showing the brutality of combat and lingering close-up shots of violence and gore. For 8 seasons, the original show walked the line between the violence expected of any good swords and pure cruelty just for the sake of cruelty in its choices. Some of it really was hard to watch. This applied to either on-screen, such as pregnant Talisa Stark being stabbed in the stomach again and again, or off-screen acts like the burning of little princess Shireen Baratheon. House of the Dragon may be inclined to push the limits even further. After all, it's adapted from the novel Fire and Blood, but it would be smart not to fall back on nonsensical, constant acts of excessive violence, as this either drives fans away or creates viewers who've become more and more difficult to truly impact unless you just keep pushing and pushing. They should keep travel times consistent. Maybe the new prequel will put an end to the debate over how long it takes to travel through Westeros. We spent several episodes in the early episodes with the Stark family as they made the weeks-long trip from Winterfell to King's Landing. Arya and the Hound's adventures, or Jaime and Brienne's, seemed to last months. But even so, during the last 2 seasons, people were showing up almost everywhere with no warning. Within the same episode, Varys can be spotted in Dorne as well as across the sea and Marine. Do you think he teleported? Advocates of the show argue that the pacing and timeframes were simply adjusted to accommodate the much busier narrative of the later years. But that doesn't justify the episode Beyond the Wall. In this episode, Gendry sets out a raven from the wall to Dany at Dragonstone, who then flew to the rescue, all in just a single day. Even the director, Alan Taylor, said they were aware that the timeline was getting a little muddled. Because House of the Dragon will concentrate on Targaryens ingrained in power at King's Landing prior to the events of Game of Thrones, it could be less travel-centric. Despite the fact that several major characters will still have dragons, the show could be accurate with its timelines. Even in the opening credits, the long stretch of Westeros had been an essential part of the appeal of Game of Thrones, as the geographical distance gave the impression that we were exploring a whole world. The spin-off can figure out an acceptable way to portray how long it takes to get about, and may be able to avoid yet another distraction. And that's all for today's video. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for more movie-related news. Until then, we'll see you next time.